In 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright flew just 120 feet on a windy beach in North Carolina. I mean, it barely worked, but nobody called it a failure. Now, fast forward with me to 1992. Hewlett-Packard introduces the smallest hard disk drive ever built. This technology was a genuine, undeniable breakthrough. The launch got more press coverage than any product announcement in HP's entire history. The co-founder actually came out of retirement just to preside at the press conference, and the CEO was literally carrying one in his pocket everywhere he went. But 2 years later, the entire project was canceled. Welcome to our explainer on the innovator's paradox.
Okay, let's dive into this really beautiful contrast. Why did the Wright brothers' barely working plane make history, while HP's flawless engineering marvel completely crash and burn? Well, HP didn't fail because they built a bad product. They failed because they built a great product for a market that just didn't exist yet. And then they made every reasonable, entirely logical mistake you can possibly make when you're trying to find one. This is the story of the Kittyhawk, and it might honestly be the most accurate look at what innovation actually feels like from the inside.
I mean, just look at this thing. Back in 1992, HP built the world's smallest hard drive. The disks were only 1.3 inches in diameter. The entire unit was about the size of 2 postage stamps and weighed just a single ounce while storing 20 megabytes. But here's the crazy part. It could survive a 3-foot drop onto solid concrete without losing a single bit of data.
Chapter 1. The Perfect Failure.
So, to understand this perfect failure, we really have to look at why HP's disk memory division decided to build something so totally unprecedented in the first place. By 1991, they were a profitable division, sure, but they were small. In an industry where IBM had $4 billion in sales and Seagate had $3 billion, HP was only doing $519 million. They were just a tiny niche player. And this really bothered their general manager, Bruce Spenner. He kept asking, why don't we have 20% market share? How do we become the next massive printer business for HP? Well, his answer was bold. Don't compete on the existing hill. Find a new one. His boss, HP Executive Vice President Dick Hackborn, had this absolute favorite maxim: never take a fortified hill. So instead of fighting giants on existing battlegrounds, the team set out to build something that had never been built before and use it to invent an entirely new market. And they went all in. Working out of secret trailers, the team moved at absolute breakneck speed. They actually launched the Kittyhawk in an unprecedented 12 months, totally shattering HP's usual 18-month average. It was such a triumph that, like I mentioned earlier, William Hewlett himself showed up to the launch. It won Keck Awards left and right. But despite all that unprecedented hype, they were about to run into a massive reality-checking wall. The only problem was, who was actually going to buy it? Chapter 2. The $50 Problem. Because an amazing product is completely useless if the economics don't align with reality. Just 1 week after the project kicked off, the team went to the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, and they found their first huge signal at the Nintendo booth, which was, by the way, 9 times larger than anything else there. Standing in this maze of games, the team had this exact realization. We could fit 50 games onto one Kittyhawk. They pulled a Nintendo manager aside, who said they absolutely wanted it. They were shipping 1.5 million cartridges a day during Christmas. But there was one catch. It had to be cheap, specifically around $50. And here's where the math completely falls apart. $130. That was the lowest price ever achieved for any disk drive in the history of the entire industry. That wasn't just a markup, that was a hard cost floor. It was simply what the raw components cost to buy and assemble. Getting from $130 down to Nintendo's $50 demand wasn't going to be just some minor engineering tweak. It required a massive design breakthrough that simply didn't exist yet. The wildest part about all this? Before the project even started, the engineers had literally signed a creed promising to build a small, dumb, cheap disk drive. But remember that incredible 3-foot drop feature? To pull that off, they had to invent a custom 6-axis accelerometer, basically an airbag sensor for data. The project leader actually said the tech was amazing, an elegant design, but that component alone cost over $10 to make. He literally said, but man, was it cool. They were completely breaking their own rules.
Chapter 3. The Echo Chamber.
So, totally priced out of the mass consumer market that Nintendo offered, HP pivoted. They chose a different beachhead: personal digital assistants, or PDAs. Apple, IBM, Motorola, everyone was pouring hundreds of millions into them. and HP's logic was totally sound on paper. PDA volume would scale up, drive down manufacturing costs, and then eventually they could hit that $50 price point and go back to Nintendo. But as we see here, they walked right into an echo chamber. The PDA market failed to emerge. Handwriting software wasn't ready. Digital cameras were too expensive to sell in high volumes. Even HP's own notebook division passed on the Kittyhawk because it just didn't have enough storage. So when we look at the root causes, HP absolutely did not fail because of bad tech. They failed because they over-delivered on expensive features like that accelerometer. Their sales targets demanded massive volume and a market that was barely a blip on the radar. Their success became entirely dependent on other companies getting their own technologies right. And they locked into the wrong customers way too early, assuming the market's needs were perfectly defined when they really weren't. Ultimately, just 2 short years after its spectacular award-winning launch, the Kittyhawk project was canceled. It stands as this incredible, powerful reminder that doing everything perfectly right in engineering can still lead you straight into a commercial disaster if your strategic foundation is built on a market that hasn't arrived yet. Chapter 4: Lessons for Today's Giants. So you're probably wondering, how does a failure from 1992 actually apply to the massive tech battles happening right now? Well, let's contrast HP's strategy of trying to invent a brand new, unfortified hill with Alphabet and Google's dilemma today. Google is in the exact opposite position. They are desperately trying to defend a deeply, deeply fortified hill against the massive disruption of generative AI. For 2 decades, Google has practically owned the internet. By late 2022, they held over 93% of the global desktop search market. I mean, this search engine processes queries that quite literally print hundreds of billions of dollars in advertising cash. It is the very definition of a fortified hill. And the irony here is just wild. Much like HP had the absolute brightest engineers building the Kittyhawk, Google's scientists practically laid the groundwork for their own disruption. They were the undisputed leaders in AI for years. Back in 2017, Google researchers published Attention is All You Need, which literally invented the transformer architecture. That's the underlying backbone for nearly all modern generative AI, including tools like ChatGPT. But as we've seen, holding the foundational tech doesn't guarantee your market is safe. By June of 2025, Alphabet had shed $250 billion in market cap. Why? Because for the first time in 20 years, hundreds of millions of users started turning to AI chatbots instead of Google search. But for Google, incorporating AI into search means taking on massive new computing costs and threatening the very advertising model that built their empire. But if they don't do it, they risk total obsolescence. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. When technology aggressively shifts the ground beneath you, the innovator's paradox forces your hand. So what do you think is actually more dangerous? Attacking a new hill blindly, hoping a market magically appears like HP did with the Kittyhawk, or defending a fortified hill stubbornly, as Google is fighting to do right now? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this sparks some deep thinking about what innovation really demands from us.